The Pistons are the basketball champions of the world.
Detroit, it's time. It's playoff time, Detroit. Let's go to work.
Shout out Detroit. I got to buff up, you know what I'm saying? Detroit, I'm all the way in. Detroit Pistons, I'm all the way in. Let's do it.
Hello, Pistons fans, and welcome back to yet another episode of the Buffs On podcast. Fresh after the Pistons opening night game, which they unfortunately lost. It's a solo podcast today. Just Vali, just me here today. Tough schedules for everyone. Amit was able to be at that game in person and enjoy that lively atmosphere last night, but just me today, and we're going to go over exactly what you think we're going to go over. We're going to go over that Pistons-Pacers game where they lost 115 to 109. The Pistons were led by Cade Cunningham, who led the team with 28 points, 5 rebounds, and 8 assists, and was on a heater in that third quarter, using his physicality to get wherever he wanted to. However, the Pistons really just fell up short in that fourth quarter, getting outscored 33-19. And I know what everyone is thinking, what every Pistons fan is thinking, and I've seen this on social media. Oh boy, it's the same thing as last season. And although there may be some similarities after game one, I want to really shed some light on the positives here. And I know we're not here for another season of moral victories where we can say, oh, but this happened. We can take this from the game. I do want to focus on some positive things I saw and some really encouraging signs that will ultimately lead to a more successful season. I do believe in. I don't think there's anywhere other to start than Cade Cunningham, and I touched on it a bit, but Cade Cunningham took over in that third quarter. He ended up with 28 points, 5 rebounds, eight assists, and shot 10 for 22, hit 2 triples on 6 attempts as well. I like the amount of threes he got up. I think we're only going to see that number rise as the season goes on, but the biggest key for me with Cade Cunningham is nobody can stop him from getting to the rim. We saw him on multiple matchups with guys who are listed as taller than him and weighing more than him, and he just bullies him down to the paint and has that long reach to be able to finish and a nice soft touch. There was a play specifically in the third quarter where he took a nice couple of bumps and went kind of to a Kareem Abdul-Jabbar-esque hook shot, got a nice roll just when the Pistons needed it most, put us up by 2. And that's when we did need him the most, in that third quarter, because Miles Turner and the Pacers came out on a heater. They brought more physicality, and all of a sudden they were ahead. And a 13-0 run put them ahead, and all of a sudden we're thinking, oh boy, chalk up another loss. And while that was the ultimate result, Cade Cunningham did everything he could. Had a beautiful spin into a double clutch for a lay, just really took over a game. I'll touch on it in my more negative takeaways. I want to do this in a positive and a negative takeaway segment, but Cade does need to be more assertive in the clutch time, I think. But Cade Cunningham overall was genuinely unstoppable in that game. On top of his 8 assists, that was only matched with just 2 turnovers. Cade Cunningham has been knacked on for being a high turnover player in the past, despite having a high assist numbers. But Cade Cunningham, just 2 turnovers in this one, and I know one of those at least was a little bit of a miscommunication. A -9 in the box score. I thought he pitched in well on defense as well. I think he did an excellent job containing Tyrese Halliburton, and he was a big contributor to the ultimate struggles of Halliburton in that match. Although the team defense, I think, was quite in a tribute to that as well. My next point I want to go over is the defense that we saw from Jalen Duren. I myself have been quite critical of Jalen Duren in the past on his defensive effort and his numbers in terms of the box score. And while he didn't have a box score through their block, I think Jalen Duren was instrumental to anchoring that defense. I think it's easy to forget that we gave up 115 points, but I think it's easy to forget that the Indiana Pacers are capable of dropping 130, 140, even 150 on any team. And they do that on a regular basis. And it wasn't really until that fourth quarter where they got hot, where maybe some experience of being conference finalists just kind of comes into play and having experienced players like Tyrese Halliburton and some other guys. But I thought Jalen Duren on the defense, interior defense was fantastic in terms of contesting shots, being a presence and rotating. But one thing specifically was his rebounding. He had a lot of contested rebounds that were just genuinely phenomenal. We saw that big body presence he had. He shot 4 for 4 in this game. 13 points, 13 rebounds. How about 4 assists? How about 4 assists from Jalen Duren? I thought he did an excellent job moving that ball out. He kicked out to Tobias quite a few times after really being a hub of attention. And that's something we've touched on a lot about in this podcast a lot. Connie specifically in our pod has touched on Jalen Duren's passing ability, and it was in full motion tonight with the 4 assists. He had 2 turnovers as well. That's something I've been a little critical on, but I'll give him some slack on that, considering it is the first game. But I just want to give Jalen Duren his flowers on the interior defense side of things, an area where I haven't given him flowers in the past. I think it's important to just touch on some player performances, and this is what we've been waiting for all year, right? Player performances. So I want to move into Jaden Ivey, who put up 17 points, 5 rebounds, and 4 assists, and had a bit of a slow start. He shot the ball 5 for 13. Also, just want to know he only had one turnover. And that's my first point with Jaden Ivey. I think there's some things you can be critical of in his performance, but what I like the most is how, and I saw this in preseason, is how he's learning to use his speed. The game seems to be slowing down for him in a sense, where he knows when he can explode. Because I said it yesterday when watching the game with my group that put every single player in the NBA in a court, 94-foot sprint. I would put some money down that Jaden Ivey is winning that, and I think that was in full display in this game. And what's most important is how calm he was at times. In terms of speed, not necessarily the shot selection, slowing and going. Specifically, the and one he picked up, let's say on Miles Turner, was the foul in that third quarter where he was sprinting up the court, and in the past we'd seen him just take those 2 long strides and try to get up to the rim and most likely fall on the ground and put us in a 4-on-5 situation. However, he heads inside, cuts back, and immediately cuts right back, gets to the rim for that beautiful right-handed extension and one off the glass to give us a lead. I think he was instrumental when Cade Cunningham came off the floor in that second half. One thing with him is I want him to be more assertive going to the rack. I don't think there's anybody who can stop him from getting to the rim. And the only way you realistically can is either by fouling or by Jaden Ivey kicking out to a teammate. Important to note as well, Ivey shot 9 free throws in this game. I thought he'd be one of the players that could shoot the most free throws in the NBA, along with Cade Cunningham. Ivey 7 for 9 from the line. Cade Cunningham 6 for 6. I do think there was some questionable shot selection from Ivey, especially in that fourth quarter, but incredibly cited, especially coming off that thrilling preseason that Jaden Ivey had. And again, I think everybody in his team deserves some credit for their defensive abilities and their defensive performances that game. And Ivey's been no beating around the bush. He's been a horrific defender in his first couple years in the league, but he looked like a solid defender. And again, it's not one player who's ever going to shut down one player. And when you look at Tyrese Halliburton struggles, I gave a lot of credit to Cade, but give some credit to Ivy as well. A lot of smart double teams, a lot of full court checking. I think Ivy can be used as more of an energy guy a lot, like we see with Ron Holland on the defensive end of things, especially when in the third quarter, for example, Cade is on a heater and you know Cade's going to be the one ideally shooting that basketball or at least running the plays. Ivy can really focus his energy and efforts on the defensive side of things, and I do think he did that last game. And we won't really go into every single person's performance. I want to credit Tim Hardaway for playing well, hitting a couple of big shots, especially early. Someone who really struggled in preseason, although the defensive side of things maintained for him. But speaking of defense, I do really want to give a special shout out to 2 players. And one guy who I think gets a lot of criticism is Isaiah Stewart. And Isaiah Stewart, to me, brought it off that bench. And one thing I touched on with him when watching that game yesterday is I think Isaiah Stewart coming off that bench has more leniency and room to be that enforcer, be physical. Kind of reminds me of a Rick Mahorn role. Some of the old heads may hopefully find that fitting, but I think Isaiah Stewart was instrumental off that bench, and he can be physical and he can pick up more fouls. Although he did only pick up 2, he was a +5 in the box score despite only having 2 points and only attempting 2 shots. Give him a steal and a block in the box score, a big block he had as well. I forget, it was on Nemhart, I do believe. I'm forgetting now, but I think Isaiah Stewart, not only does he bring it defensively, he brings the energy, and that's something that's been attributed to him his whole entire career. When he first made his debut for the Pistons, he got ejected in a preseason game. Brings that defensive intensity. Other people I just know hate playing against him. He seems to be kind of getting into little chippy altercations, just cheeky stuff every single game. You saw that a little bit with Miles Turner, and you saw that ripping foul he had in the second half on Miles Turner. But I really do credit him coming off that bench, which is a difficult adjustment to make coming off that bench, and especially after being a 4 last year. I do honestly believe he deserves a little bit of leniency in the transition. However, he's doing perfectly fine. I thought he was excellent. He was a good option in the role. I'd like to see him pop more. I don't think any team is really respecting his jumper when he's at the 5 and we already have spacing on the floor. I think that pick and pop is really on all day, and I hope Bickerstaff is going to utilize that more. But credit to Stewart for bringing off the bench with energy and defense. And another guy who did the exact same thing with Pistons rookie Ron Holland. One of the guys I was most excited to see, if not most excited to see, get on the court. And he scored 6 points, had 3 rebounds, and of course he had 2 steals. Of course he had a technical foul. And not talking about the one with 6 players. Ron Holland was excellent. 0 for 3 from three, but the shot looked pretty decent. The touch isn't quite there, but mechanically it looks pretty decent. Most of his shots were on line that missed from deep. But just talk about defense, man. Just talk about effort. Again, a guy you just hate to come up against, but a guy you love on your team. Brings so much energy. I think his minutes are cemented. One thing I noticed in the clutch is, man, I wish we had a little more defense on the floor, but maybe Ron isn't ready. I think getting Asar Thompson back eventually and hopefully would be a really big addition to this team. And I think Ron Holland is going to maintain his minutes no matter what. He played 15 minutes, 6 points, 3 rebounds, 2 steals, only 1 turnover for a young man. Pretty decent. 12 as a team. I'll touch on that in just a bit. But Ron Holland and Isaiah Stewart, they deserve their flowers for their defensive intensity they brought to the team. On top of that, from a team defense standpoint, we limited Indiana to just 9 threes on 29% shooting. Indiana's identity really is 3-point shooting, and we shut that down. And therefore, at the end of the day, I think we were a little unlucky not to come out on top. But I think there's a lot to take away from our defensive performances. Again, I just want to capitalize on and reiterate the fact that Indiana only made 9 3-pointers, and that's a team with Tyrese Halliburton, who did struggle, but he did also struggle because of our very good defense, I thought. And one thing I want to touch on in terms of our defense is we forced Indiana into 15 turnovers. They're traditionally a low turnover team, and I think we did a great job at forcing their turnovers and just creating havoc. And again, that cycles back to Ron Holland and Isaiah Stewart. So let's talk some more team aspects for the Pistons. Again, I'm staying with a couple more positive takes before thinking about a few negatives as we close out this podcast. But I mentioned the turnovers for Indiana there. The Pistons only had 12 turnovers. And while that may still not be optimal, it is relatively low. It's on the lower end. And when you look at this team last year, they averaged 15 and a half turnovers per game, which I believe was second highest in the entire organization. And when you have guys like Ivy and Cade, who have been traditionally so high turnovers, seeing them beat low turnovers is very exciting. It shows development and a greater reading of the game through their experience of playing basketball. 12 turnovers, really encouraging in my opinion. Another aspect from the team that I thought was encouraging was the 3-point attempts. And I think this number is a little bit adjusted because quite frankly, we did struggle from deep. We didn't hit that many shots, and that's despite Tim Hardaway hitting 4 out of our 7 threes. We attempted 33 3-point attempts. And again, this is despite Cade going 2 for 6, which is decent, but Ivy 0 for 2, Tobias Harris 1 for 6, Ron Holland 0 for 3, Simone Fontecchio, a great shooter, Isaiah Stewart, a great shooter. They went 0 for 2 and 0 for 1, respectively. And as a team, we ended up also making 9, but 9 for 33 attempts. But I really want to focus solely on the attempts. That's more attempts than we averaged per game of all of last year. And in our first game, I like that. I think there was a lot of getting to the basket and a lot of threes. And there was some in-between game, but that's because you have guys like Cade Cunningham. I like the fact this is the modern NBA. You need to shoot a lot of threes in the modern NBA. And we saw the graphic on, I can't call it Valley Sports Detroit anymore. I'm still used to calling it Fox Sports Detroit. Whatever it's called now, we saw the graphic of our additions from 3-point shooters, including resetting Simone Fontecchio, who I think was unlucky in that first game and based on who he is as a player and who he is, he'll bounce back, no problem. But encouraging signs in the number of threes we got up. And I like the looks that we got up. And I do want to shout out Malik Beasley, who shot 5 for 13 in this one, 2 for 6 from deep as well. He's going to have an ability to just shoot threes. In a way, kind of reminds me of Wayne Ellington when he was here with Blake Griffin, a guy that can just pull up with any amount of space. And that's a full compliment. Wayne Ellington had a great NBA career and was a great shooter. I see a lot of similarities with Wayne Ellington's game to kind of Malik Beasley, where he can just provide you points and bunches because he can get hot and he can shoot with any amount of space given to him. One final thing I want to touch on that I'm including in our positive takeaways is the fight from JB Bickerstaff. This was some of the most refreshing things to see. And in the moment, it was difficult to see because the way the game was going. But I haven't seen a Pistons coach fight like that. I certainly didn't see it last season with Monty Williams. So I think it was just refreshing to see that fight from Bickerstaff, especially advocating for Ron Holland when he received, or we received a team technically for having 6 players on the court. He went into a lengthy discussion and advocated for his players. And that's something I touched on when we first hired Bickerstaff. JB Bickerstaff has been ejected from multiple games solely for advocating for his players for incorrect calls, in his opinion. And I love seeing that on the first day. I think this team needs someone who's going to fight for them, not like a guy like Monty who's just going to stand there cross-armed or sit on the bench. I think Bickerstaff just is a real players coach, and I genuinely believe in no time the players are going to dig into this. They're going to buy into this. I think we said stuff like this before, but having a hands-on players coach like that is going to change the game for these young players. I think JB Bickerstaff is the perfect fit for this organization. We saw it with Thron Holland when he got that team technical. When there was that call overturned on Tobias Harris, where he had the and one controversy overturned, he was there fighting for his team. I love the grit and the grind that JB Bickerstaff showed. I could not be more happy with his appointment after game one.